Welcome back to another episode of the Rain Race podcast. We are, as Stu would call, fashionably late by just a couple minutes tonight. It's all right. I sort of trapped myself into a corner with this episode a little bit by saving all the episode notes for like an hour before the show started. But that's all behind the scenes stuff that you don't see most of the time. But point is, we got another episode in hand for you. We had one last week. I was a little bit more rushed last week. Trying to get that episode out, going to sleep, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning on the dot, and getting a flight down to Atlanta to go to Motul Petit Le Mans. I believe it was the 26th running of it this year.
26, 25 or 26, one of those.
26. I think it was 26. Which we will be recapping in this episode. Anyway, before we do that, though, got my co-host over here, Stu, off in the Esses. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. I was not at Petit Le Mans, so I am incredibly jealous that that you were there. But we have quite a bit to talk about tonight.
We do. We got some good news. We got some sad news. We got everything in between, and we got some of your questions as well that we'll try to get to during this episode as well. I just do want to point out, as I do in every single episode, obviously because it's a live show, feel free to drop your comments in the chat, and we'll try to get to those as we can. I already see a couple of people here. We got Nico, Taras, hello Taras, Fabian, and Ananas. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Ananas Studio. Anyway, ask your questions. We'll try to get to those during the episode. For now, I want to start things off. We'll start things off on the positive side of things. I want to talk about Motul Petit Le Mans. Positive, I guess, in terms of, I guess it depends what team you are. We'll start from the start, though. We'll start from qualifying. It's a pretty damp week over in Atlanta. From Wednesday when I got there, pretty much through almost the end of it, except for race day. We got kind of lucky with the conditions. But for qualifying, we had damp conditions, especially for the GTP class. Matter of fact, so damp that the GTP cars qualified behind the LMP2 fastest time, which was the 52 PR1 Matheson Motorsports Orca, driven by good old Ben Keating, through the car kind of on the overall pole, but IMSA didn't let that stand, and we had to have the classes start in their typical order, unfortunately. But as a result of that, the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura did get pole in the GTP class. Like I said, damp conditions all around. There were a couple of cars in the GT ranks. I believe it was the Heart of Racing Aston Martin in GTD Pro that was able to get a lap in on slick tires, and that was what solidified their pole position, I guess. But most of the teams were running on those wet weather tires for the qualifying session. For the race start, we had a little bit of drama before the start of the race. I'll preface this by saying this. You know, I always say that it's hard to follow a race when you're actually at the track. And I think Petit Le Mans is one of the easier races actually to follow while you're at the track, but it's still a lot harder, and especially harder when I forgot these little things right here in my ears, which I usually bring to the track so I can listen to IMSA Radio, Radio Le Mans, whatever race I might be at. And I forgot those on the table after the podcast last week. So I was flying blind at Petit Le Mans this year. We did have a crash before the start there. Not really a crash, but some off tracks before the start with the... we had an LMP3 car off track. I didn't get note of that one, but it was also the number 8 Tower LMP2 car that went off the track before the green flag even dropped. Don't know if you got note on who it was in the P3 class. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I thought it might have been the JDC. No, JDC doesn't have the LMP3 in there anymore.
No, they do.
They kept... Okay. Yeah, so I think it was the JDC LMP3 that went off.
Okay. That sounds like it might strike a chord. I can't remember to be exact. Somebody in the chat will probably correct us. Bit of drama though. Bit of drama going on before the start of the race. Sebastian Bourdais didn't take very long though to get the overall lead from Wayne Taylor Racing. I just want to say it was a mega drive from Sebastian Bourdais. I believe he ended up having the fastest lap of the race. One of his more stellar performances when you look at his long, illustrious list of sports car racing results. I mean, it seems like he didn't really put a foot wrong all day, and definitely noteworthy from Bourdais. I think it was an incredible drive from him. but took the lead early on, and pretty much the 01 had a pretty comfortable lead throughout the earlier stages in the race. I do also want to give a shout out while I'm on the topic. I was sitting in turn 10B at the start of the race, which, if you know, that's the left-right sort of chicane before the final downhill at the track. The driver that stood out to me at the start the most was Dorian Pan. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the French pronunciation of that. I think I'm mostly correct.
You're close enough.
Close enough. Thank you. I'll take the Canadian to correct me on my French.
Hey, French is one of our kind of official languages. So.
It is. It's more official than it is in the States, so I'll give you that. She qualified third in the GT class overall, so if you want to think of just splitting the GTD cars and GTD Pro cars and combining them into one class, she would have been third overall, second in class in that Lamborghini, the Iron Dames 83 Lamborghini. Was able to get to the overall GT lead within the first 20 minutes of the race and actually pulled a bit of a decent gap. One thing I want to point out is, I don't know how well TV did a good job at illustrating this, but certainly when we were at the track, I mean, the GT classes were just running in essentially a pack race for at least the first 20 minutes or so after they had the first yellow, which was just phenomenal from a GT racing standpoint. I don't feel like it gets quite enough TV time sometimes. I feel like it's a bit overshadowed by the GTP class nowadays. But seeing those GT cars in a train like that at the start of the race was absolutely incredible, and something I hope TV actually was able to get a good camera angle on, because certainly we were interested in it from the start. The Iron Dames Lamborghini, though, unfortunately they ended up falling back later in the race due to some suspension damage they got with contact from an LMP3 car. Again, I don't remember or know what LMP3 car it was, because I had just seen they'd fallen way back in class. I think they were 14th when I checked, and about 6 laps down.
I think they did an IMSA TV did an interview with Dorian, and she just mentioned it was an LMP3. Didn't mention which one, but
yeah. But I will say one thing about Dorian is that she's probably, if you want to talk about just an icon for women in motorsports, there you go. I mean, that's the driver that you're going to be looking at, I think. And she doesn't get quite as much recognition in the American sports car racing side of things. Obviously, a big presence in the European sports car racing side. She's in the World Endurance Championship this year with Prema. But I think it was great that she was able to put that performance in, and what a role model for women in motorsports.
Yeah, 100%, and definitely going to be seeing plenty more of her name in the future. She is impressed in both the WEC and in IMSA this year for sure. In both categories as well. Like I said, LMP2, GT racing. Relatively new name to the sports car racing game, but I believe she's getting upgraded to an FIA Gold license for next year. So you'll be seeing more of her in the future. I'll say that. Wonder if we could be seeing her in that as one of the drivers in that Lamborghini LMDH one day. That's something that's gotten brought up many times before. I think she certainly has the talent. I think that it would be great to. I wouldn't rush her into it per se. I think that this is something that she's 19 years old, I believe, has decades of racing in front of her as long as she stays fit and healthy. So, that's not something that she has to rush into, but she certainly has the potential to be a woman in the hypercar category, which is something we haven't seen yet in the World Endurance Championship. So, it would be great to see that, and in IMSA as well, for that fact. Let's see. I want to talk about the crash in turn 10A between the number 6 Porsche 963 in the GTP class and the Inception McLaren in the GTD class. It's kind of rare. You don't really see, unless you're lucky, I suppose, you don't really see that many crashes in front of you at an IMSA race. Multi-car crashes especially, and I was still sitting in turn 10B. This was probably about a good hour into the race or so. It all started after contact between the high-class racing LMP2 car. They turned into the Triazzi Competizione Ferrari, going down the straightaway towards turn 10A. Just the LMP2 high-class car sort of weaved over. I believe they were going over to the right side of the track. Clipped that Ferrari.
and then the Ferrari ended up spinning into both the McLaren and the Porsche. So if you were a fan of the number 6 Porsche, that race wasn't really one to remember for you, and we'll get to some more of that later on. But it was just an interesting crash, and it's not the first time we've seen a lot of calamity in Turn 10A. We had that big pile up in the GTD, what was it, GTD Pro class that started that last year with the Corvette, I remember.
Huge shunt,
yeah, even more than what we saw this year. So it's definitely a danger zone, a bit of a danger zone from that corner.
And that LMP2, I think it was, you mentioned the number 20. They received, I think it was a 2-minute stop and hold or something along those lines for that incident. It was they were penalized pretty heavy for that.
Yep. And then not too long after that, or I guess a little bit further into the race, the number 14 Lexus, which, by the way, already won the championship just by starting the race. They were in the interesting scenario of being one of the cars that had that privilege. They slammed into a sponsor board at the start of the Esses that was weighed down by a sandbag, and that destroyed the front end of their car. I can't remember. Did they end up getting back out on track, or was that a day done for them? Okay.
Oh, that ripped the entire front end out of the car. It was, it was toast.
Which, when we were on the grid walk before the race, I actually saw one of those sponsor boards down the main straightaway, and I thought it was interesting that it was weighed down by a sandbag, but I didn't really think that much of it. Mostly because I can't remember if we've ever had an incident like that where a car's hit a billboard that was weighed down by a sandbag and it destroyed a race car. But definitely something that raised a lot of eyebrows from some fans, sort of wondering why was this a thing in the first place.
So there's a couple things with this. So I think we have definitely had cars hit these boards before.
Yep.
And usually
they carry them with them.
Yeah, they usually carry them with them, or they kind of like drive over top of it, sort of thing. I don't think it was the sandbags, or they usually use like bags of like garden potting soil as well in them. I'm not convinced that it was those that actually damaged the car. I think because there's a curb right there, and I think as the car went over the curb, the rear end kicked up a little bit. And as soon as it went nose down, the splitter just grabbed in the heavy mud, and it ripped everything up from there. And the sponsor board just happened to be right there as well. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of what happened and what actually did all the damage, because we've seen a lot of cars hit these sponsor boards before, and they'll get some damage, but more often than not, they're just carrying around the plastic board on the front of the car. And I feel like it was the amount of damage that was caused to that car. Like I don't know. There was a lot of parts. The whole front end was missing. And I think that could only really happen if the splitter dug into the front end. But regardless, it was a spectacular spray of parts and dirt when that Lexus went through.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and watch the onboard again, because I didn't see exactly what the cause of the damage was. The other thing to note is that usually, I'd say a good amount of the time when a car hits a sign like that, they're going a lot slower than the Lexus was. I mean, that was the entry to, it was a pretty high speed corner to that entry to the Esses.
Yeah.
And he just ran pretty much straight on and slammed into that board. And like you said, the splitter probably dug into the ground, which was still pretty damp, by the way, because of how much moisture we had in the air that week. You might be right. I'd have to go back and look at that one again.
There's no good view of this. I've looked for videos. Okay. There was a recap video that I saw on it might have been the IMSA page, but they don't have that part in focus. You can see in the background the Lexus going over it and then the spray of dirt, but there's not actually a great video of it, which is unfortunate. Maybe there's a fan that was in the corner that just happened to catch it, but haven't seen anything good yet.
Yep. Talk about unfortunate situations in GTD Pro. The number 3 Corvette in the final race for the C8R. The C8R in IMSA, it's not the GTE car that we still have in the WEC or the one that started racing in IMSA. It's the GT3 adapted version of the C8R. Anyway, the final race for Corvette racing in the IMSA outfit, at least, in terms of not racing as Pratt & Miller Motorsports next year, which is kind of like a Corvette factory program anyways. But anyways, they were leading the race for a good portion as well. Unfortunately, they had to retire around the halfway point due to an engine failure while they were leading the race. Really disappointing result from them. Tommy Milner was in the car at the time. Tough race, like I said, for the final race of Corvette racing in namesake in the IMSA Championship.
And Jordan Taylor's last race with Corvette as well.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot else to add for that one, but definitely a tough situation. There's still a huge amount of Corvette fans in IMSA. The autograph sessions never fail if you're a Corvette racing fan.
Yeah, those are always that's always the long line.
Yep, and it has been for years. Like I've started going to IMSA races again in 2016, and it's like the one line that's consistently long.
Yep.
And probably always will be, even when they move to I guess a factory backed but still kind of factory effort next year with Pratt & Miller. We had a couple of incidents in the LMP2 class as well, a couple of noteworthy ones that I noted down. Mikael Jensen crashed from third in class in the TDS LMP2 car. Now, they were only 33 points off the championship lead at the time that he crashed. They were fighting the 52 PR1 car that was in the lead of the race at that point. And this was in the exit of the left-hander right after the Esses. Talk about going off in the Esses, huh?
Yeah.
I guess technically not the Esses at that point, but right after it. And the Lexus was, I guess, right before it. So they're dodging us here. Tough situation for them. They were in sort of a ride-or-die scenario where they had to beat the 52 car to win the championship. They were a little bit further back at the time, probably just pushing a little bit more than they needed to be, and ended up just losing the car. So, is what it is. It's not the only car that had issues, though, because the championship leader, Alex Quinn, ended up going off in turn 10B with, I want to say, what was it, around 2 hours to go, maybe? I was back over in turn 10B at that point of the race. They went off and were on the inside of turn 10B and then drove across the track into the gravel, and we all thought they were going to get stuck there. Because he was moving really slow, just didn't think he was going to have the momentum.
Pretty deep gravel there, too.
Yeah, pretty deep. And he just kept his foot in it. Like, just completely, the engine was like revving off the limiter, kept his foot in it, kicking gravel up everywhere.
Flashers were going on it, too, I think.
And I'll tell you what, every single fan over in turn 10B at that point of the race, which there were many, myself included, was just cheering him on. I mean, talk about a comedic moment in the race. That was probably it. And everybody was just thrilled to see that they actually made it out of the gravel, not only because it didn't cause a full course yellow, but just something that was pretty unexpected at the time. And then we came down to, I guess, the defining moment of the race, which was the final hour, 1 hour to go. This is the battle for the championship between the 31 Action Express Cadillac and the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura. I said last episode in the preview that Wayne Taylor Racing has had this this weight on their shoulders for the past 4 seasons now at Petit Le Mans, trying to win the race and consequently trying to win the championship, and they've never really been able to pull it off. So this was it. This was the they're running second and third going into turn 1, and the 31 car, I guess, ran the turn like they usually would, up for argument. Pipo Durrani driving the car at the time. Number 10 car is on the left-hand side, on the outside, going into the very high-speed turn 1. Fastest corner on the track by a pretty good margin. And I guess just ran him off the track. Or did he? I mean, that's what the whole argument is. Did Durrani run Albuquerque off the track, or was this more of a racing incident where Albuquerque shouldn't have been there in the first place?
Well, I'm going to agree with IMSA Race Control's decision on this, that it was a racing incident. There are lots of people that are up in arms and pointing fingers pretty heavily at Pipo. You know, Pipo doesn't have the best record necessarily when it comes to racing incidents on track. He's known for racing hard, sometimes a little bit too hard. And you could probably make the argument here for that as well, that maybe a little bit too hard. But as you mentioned, it's the final hour of the championship deciding race. These two have been locked in a battle for a little while leading up to this point. And it should also be noted that Albuquerque is also building up a record of trying some optimistic moves, perhaps. Turn one isn't the best passing opportunity around this track. And it was a pretty aggressive move. We saw another pretty aggressive move that led to an incident not entirely Albuquerque's fault at Sebring earlier this year. But I look at this incident and I think you could point to both drivers could have done things to avoid this. And I think when that's the case, it's a racing incident. But this is definitely the most controversial moment of arguably the whole weekend, was this battle. And, you know, did people leave him enough room? You know, what ultimately happened? And we saw what happens last year when you try and go side by side into turn one, fighting hard towards the end of the race, when the Chip Ganassi cars ultimately took themselves out. But yeah, I'm okay with it being a racing incident. I think it was a racing incident. Have you had a chance to take a good look at it?
What a safe call you just made there. You're trying to not make anybody mad.
I don't know if that is the safe call.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are pretty set on people being at fault.
So here's the thing. I personally think that move was too early and too aggressive, right? I think that's like there's 2 laps to go. There's 1 lap to go. I need this position to win the championship, which, by the way, they did. I don't know if we mentioned that. Yeah. The position they were in, even being second and third place, it really came down to whichever car finished in front of the other was going to win the championship. There's an hour or so left in the race. I think there was a little bit more than an hour left. And like you said, turn one's not a place where you would typically see cars passing. And if they do pass in turn one, they would have already had... Usually it's the other way around. Usually you would have a car pass on the inside of turn one, and the move's usually set up a little bit earlier than it was. I'm okay with calling it a racing incident as well, just because I don't believe it was blatant. But the thing is, it does set a bit of a precedent, and I think that's what people are upset about, is that if you read the headline, it's Durrani runs his competitor or his championship rival off track and goes on to win the championship. I can see how that's very controversial, and I can see how, no matter which way you look at it, there's definitely it's definitely a little bit up in the air. But yeah, like you said, I don't really have a whole lot else to add from what you said. I think that the move was too aggressive. It was too early. It's not a place I would try to pass on the outside of turn one. But I'm also sitting in a basement right now, and I don't have a drive for Wayne Taylor Racing. So take that with a grain of salt. Yeah, I think that's IMSA's decision was no action on it. And that's the precedent that it sets. So hopefully we're not in a situation like this again. I think it was disappointing, no matter which car you are a fan of, because what we really were setting up was this back and forth championship fight between the two of them in the final hour or so, and I feel like that sort of took a little bit of the wind out of the sails. After that happened, it pretty much solidified a championship for the 31 car. I think BMW, the 25 car, would have needed to finish well ahead of the 31 at that point of the race, or the 31 would have needed to have some massive issue and just retired from where they were. So I think that at that point it was pretty clear to most people that the 31 could just sail to the finish and wrap up that championship. Disappointing, I think, no matter what team you're a fan of, but That's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess.
And Wayne Taylor, man,
Yeah,
absolutely no luck at this race for the past,
absolutely not.
4 years?
Yeah, I think it was 4 years, and it's they haven't always been involved in a crash like this. Last year, it was just down to a late race restart, and they didn't have the same pace that Meyer Shank Racing did.
The year before that, it came down to that final couple of corners where Ricky tried to get around. Was it Pipo in the? It might have been Pipo in the.
It was Nazar.
Was it Nazar? Okay.
Yep.
But you got to feel for those guys and gals. They've had a rough stretch at Petit.
Yeah. On the flip side, though, on the other Acura stable, you had the number 60 Meyer Shank Racing Acura going up against the 01 Ganassi Cadillac at the end of the race. We had, I think, probably about three? Did we have 3 yellows in the last hour? We had one with like 5 minutes to go. And I know we had one with about a half hour to go. And then I can't remember when the restart was for the Wayne Taylor and Action Express incident. I think it was around the hour to go mark.
I think there were 13 cautions over the 10 hours. So
yeah, it was a pretty.
Wouldn't surprise me if there was 3 at the end. Yeah,
it was a pretty caution-heavy race. Something that got mentioned while I was at the track that I want to get your thoughts on is one of my friends that I was with had told me, do you think the 60 car is taking advantage of these yellows? And we know that they're better with lower tire pressures because of a certain incident that happened at Daytona. No, I'm being completely serious here. You're talking cold track conditions, being nighttime. Obviously, when you're running under yellow, you're not going to be warming up the tires as much as you are running under green flag conditions. And the thing about Meyer Shank Racing is they just seemed like they took off on the restarts. They got around the 01 car with about 30 minutes to go on one of the restarts. And it seemed like early on in the stints after a restart, they were extremely strong and like pulling a gap. Nobody could keep up with them. But then later on, as the tires got more temperature into them, we started to see the 01 car come into contention. We started to see that maybe the 59 Proton Porsche would have a bit of a shot. But it seemed like early on in those stints, there was nobody who could touch the 60 car. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that. I think that, like I said, we know this car performs better under lower tire pressures, and I think that they were just using those yellows to their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, that is a completely reasonable argument, I think. We have seen throughout the season that the Acuras have been really good on restarts. I think as a blanket statement, I think that is accurate. I've never really thought about that, but it does make a lot of sense because you're right. The 01 over the course of I don't want to say a longer run because I don't think we got a stretch longer than like an hour and 13 minutes under green. But as the run went on and as the tires wore in and came up to full temperature, you're definitely right. The Cadillac came on a little bit more, especially the 01. Now, could that also be that Acura's or MSR was trying to manage the gap a little bit more too? It's difficult to say, but that's definitely a good observation. The Acuras were strong on the restarts in this one.
Yep. Final restart though was about 5 minutes to go. It looks like we're gonna have a grandstand finish between the 60 and the 01, and maybe the 59 Proton can do something about it. But the number 16 Wright Motorsports Porsche in the GTD class ended up catching on fire. I don't know if I certainly haven't seen a reason for why that happened. I don't know if they had contact with somebody or what the reasoning for that was. Do you know?
Yeah, I think they got rear-ended on the restart.
Okay, that would explain it. That one pretty much just ended the race, though. Like I said, 5 minutes to go, you weren't going to get a restart in time. So Meyer Shank Racing won their final race, for now at least, in IMSA in the GTP category with that Acura. They won the season opener, depending on what way you look at it. They won the season finale, and they would have won the championship had they not been penalized for their little mishaps at Daytona. So,
yeah,
worth noting.
You
3 wins on the trot. There
was a lot of people that the penalty wasn't big enough from the Rolex, and there's still going to be people that make that argument, but ultimately that a turn of events at the Rolex cost them the championship. If they had just finished, I think if they had just finished last place in class instead of getting a full 200-point penalty, if they had just finished very last in GTP, they still would have won this championship, I think.
Yeah.
And it cost them big time.
Mm-hmm. The number 04 CrowdStrike Racing Orca won an LMP2. I'm just going to kind of speed run through the winners now. The 30 Junior 3 Ligier won in the LMP3 category. 79 WeatherTech Racing Mercedes won in GTD Pro. And the 78 Forte Racing Lamborghini won in GTD. And I believe, actually, you have the championship results you want to go over as well.
I do. So in GTP, it was the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac that took the win there. They had 2,733 points to the number 10 Acura's 2,712. Noteworthy here as well, the 60 was just 1 point back of the number 10. In LMP2 was the number 51 PR1 Matheson Motorsports entry that took the championship there. They beat out the 04 CrowdStrike Racing. And interesting how these championships work out. Despite the 52 getting the victory there, it was actually George Kurtz in the number 04 that took home the, I can't remember if it's the Jim Truman or the Bob Aitken Bronze Driver Award, which gets you an automatic invite to the following year's 24 Hours of Le Mans. So George Kurtz will be going to Le Mans next year.
Has an invite at least.
Yes, you're right. Has an invite at least. I'm sure I would be surprised if we don't see Ben Keating there as well, though. But we'll see how he gets there. The number 74 Riley Motorsports Ligier took the LMP3 class championship. They took it by virtue of starting this race. I believe that's all that they had to do. So congratulations to them. A dominant performance put on by them in the final season of LMP3. And GTD Pro, the number 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus started the race and clinched the championship there. They have had a very strong 365-day stretch dating back to last year's Le Mans or Petit Le Mans. This was obviously not a great result for them today, but getting the championship is, that's what they went there to do. And then, of course, in GTD, the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW, they locked it up after the last event at Indianapolis.
Yep. Let's see. I think we had a couple of chat messages to go over related to Petit Le Mans. Let's see. Jensen Button debuted in IMSA debut, I guess. Never drove on this track. Yep. 10 hours of racing, the best sports car racers, and finished 5th. Yeah, the JDC car was really strong. And not just the JDC car. Also, we saw the best finish for a privateer Porsche in either IMSA or the WEC out of the 59 Proton car. So, I think both GTP privateer Porsches had a great result. And it was great to see Jensen Button as well. Although I will say the autograph line was 45-ish minutes long, and and I did have the entire JDC team, both GTP and LMP3, sign a banana, which I then ate immediately and then threw in the trash. So, but you got to do some funny things sometimes. You got to do what makes you laugh.
Jensen Button did well and pretty well in the car too. He put faster laps on the board than some very experienced GTP drivers, Elio Castroneves, he was faster than him, Philippe Ang, Nicky Loli. So he was definitely no slouch in that car.
Yep. All right. I think that's it for the Petit Le Mans chat messages I want to go over. But if you have any other, just drop them now. We can get to those at the end of the episode. Also, during the Road Atlanta weekend, which usually happens earlier in the season at the Road America round, which I'll always mix up the two of them, the IMSA State of the Series. Now, we did have the 2024 IMSA schedule released around Road America this year. But the official State of the Series press conference, whatever you want to call it, took place at Petit Le Mans this year. That's where we got the full season entry list for the IMSA WeatherTech SportsCar Championship, along with the Michelin Endurance Cup entries that we'll be seeing as well. And Stu, I believe you prepared a nice little segment to go over all those entries that we'll be seeing on the grid in IMSA next year.
Yeah, it's a super exciting time whenever, not only when you get the schedule, but also this is the earliest that IMSA has ever released an entry list.
Yep.
So that just goes to show how fast the series and sports car racing has grown over the last few years, that they've gotten to the point where we're not necessarily going to be finding out entries that are on the grid, a week, 2 weeks before the Rolex. We are finding out months in advance now, and it is going to be a massive grid next year. 48 full season entries have registered. That is just about maximum capacity, with 10 GTP, 11 LMP2s, 10 GTD Pro entries, and 17 GTD entries. This 48 number is an increase of 25% from this season. So a very healthy grid at every single race this year. And for those Michelin Endurance Cup events, it is going to be even larger. It's looking like we're going to get pretty much a full 57 car grid for every single Michelin Endurance Cup event. There's 53 entries that are already registered for all 5 of the events. And then there's another handful that are registered for a few of them, or as few as one. I think there's one car that's probably just doing the Rolex 24. But regardless, we're 53 entries for the Michelin Endurance Cup. Top that up to whatever the maximum capacity is for each track, and it's going to be pretty busy out there. One note is, of course, all the tracks can accommodate a different number of cars. I think we saw 54 on the initial entry list for Petit Le Mans this year, and that was listed as max capacity for that track. Whereas the Rolex and Daytona, it can accommodate 60. Maybe they can push it to 61 like they did this year. But a couple of notable changes too that I just want to touch on here from this or next year's entry list. Of course, they're in GTP. We see the loss of Meyershank Racing. Big loss. Unfortunate to see that they're not going to be on the grid at all next year. But as we've talked about, hopefully we'll see them back in 2025. There's the addition of the number 40 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura sort of in its place. Of course, Wayne Taylor Racing going to be running the 2 entries next year. And then the number 63 Iron Lynx Lamborghini will be debuting in IMSA next year. Not expected to be at the Rolex, although I guess we can still always hope for that. But they are expected to do the other 4 Michelin Endurance Cup events as of right now, at least.
That's right. 5 endurance races next year.
Yeah. With Indy coming on. Indy's a 6-hour race, I think.
Yep.
Okay. Then as we move on to LMP2, there's going to be 4 more entries on the grid from this year. Of course, we know the WEC taking away the LMP2 class. Lots of them have been looking towards IMSA. Of course, we're going to get the 2 United Autosport entries. One of those entries is extremely strong that we know of so far. Sean Creech Motorsport is entering a Ligier into the LMP2 class. So it's not just going to be the Spec Orica Cup. And of course, then we have Riley Motorsports moving up from the LMP3 class to LMP2. And AO Racing is going to have an LMP2 featured on the grid as well. Will it be a dinosaur? Nobody knows. We'll have to wait and find out. A strong competitor this year, TDS Racing, has also reduced their car count to just 1 LMP2 for next season. GTD Pro, we're going to see the entry list double to 10 entries. That is a healthy increase from, of course, the 5 that we had this year. Paul Miller Racing among those, moving up from the GTD class. Corvette Racing by Pratt Miller is expanding their fleet and adding an additional car. Ford Multimatic is bringing 2 Mustangs onto the grid. There's going to be a couple of Porsches that are moving up from the GTD class in the AO Racing entry, which it's understood that Rexy is probably sticking around on that car. So hopefully we'll see that come January. And Kelly Moss Racing also making the jump up to GTD Pro. And then a notable loss. He was actually, Cooper McNeil was present at Petit Le Mans. Not driving, but they're supporting the team. And the number 79 WeatherTech Racing Mercedes, which Cooper had raced for and won in the Rolex 24, that is missing from the entry list. And according to Daily Sports Cars, Stephen Kilby, he reported that David McNeil, who sort of owns that car, he wasn't pleased with the BOP for much of the season and cited that as a reason why they hadn't committed to what their 2024 plans were going to be yet, and they were going to make a decision after Petit Le Mans. But with them coming out victorious in Petit Le Mans, hopefully we'll see them on the grid.
Not the first time, by the way, they've switched due to poor BOP.
True.
They switched from Porsche to Mercedes because of the same reason.
And they also, I think they had a Ferrari that they fielded one year as well.
Yep. Yeah, back in 2018, I want to say.
Yeah. It
was a minute ago.
Jumped around. Yeah. But all those cars, they look great. That WeatherTech livery on them, it looks clean. So at least we'll get to see them in GTP regardless. We'll get to see that livery.
Yep.
And then finally wrapping up with GTD, we're going to see a full-time Ferrari on the grid next year, which it has been a number of years since we've seen that, as Conquest Racing is joining the full season grid. AWA is moving from LMP3 and adding a couple of customer Corvettes. Andretti Motorsports is coming on board with a full season Aston Martin entry, and MDK Motorsports, which, if you'll remember back to the Rolex, they were supposed to be fielding an entry with Kevin and Jan Magnussen. They are going to be on the full season grid for this year as well. For next year, sorry.
Yeah. A couple of notable things in there. I think the biggest stat to me that jumps out, we're seeing a 25% increase in cars despite losing one whole class. So that's the one that stood out.
And all of it, it's really impressive, actually. All of the full season, I think, LMP3 teams, or maybe it's all the teams that did the Michelin Endurance Cup, they're all remaining within IMSA, I believe, with the exception of Performance Tech. Performance Tech has said they're going to take a year off, but Junior 3 was one of the cars that, or one of the teams that we hadn't seen mentioned in a program, but they're actually going to be using their shop and personnel resources to help the United Autosports LMP2 entry. So good to see that. One of the concerns was, when you lose a class, what's going to happen to all these teams that raced in it, and of course the drivers, the personnel, etc. And it looks like everyone is pretty much found their footing for next season. Yeah,
which is fantastic, and it's great to see additional GT cars stepping up for the GT only races. I guess we only have one GT only race next year, right? It would just be VIR with the absence of Lime Rock from the 2024 schedule.
Yep. Don't need to open that wound again, though, do we?
For 2025 and beyond, though, great to see an increase in GTD cars, assuming they all stay at least. I've said this like 5 times now. What a great problem for sports car racing to have, where there's so much interest, and it's great that we're able to be in a position that that we can have an entry list out this early, like you said, and we can have a field that's already set in stone. It's fantastic. I'm really glad that IMSA is able to be in this position right now. I was watching just randomly, I was watching the 2015 Petit Le Mans earlier, I guess last week. And it's crazy to think how much IMSA as a series has grown in the 8 years it's been since then. Not just from a car standpoint, the cars are a lot more technologically advanced nowadays, but also from a fan standpoint. I know it was pouring rain in that race, but the fan appearance that we've seen at some of the bigger endurance races this year has been phenomenal. Of course, I've only been to, I guess, 3 IMSA races this year: Daytona, Lime Rock, and the Petit Le Mans. But grid walks in all of them, massive attendance to all of those, to the point where like I don't even want to do them half the time because there's so many people.
So packed.
It's fantastic.
How would you compare this year's attendance to last year's? Because you were at last year's Petit Le Mans, right?
I was. I wouldn't say it was. I wouldn't say it was noticeably larger. I was talking to other people who said that they definitely thought it was larger. What I will say, and this might sound like a complaint about Road Atlanta, but I'll try to steer around it, is the traffic situation was horrendous. Where we were actually stuck getting out of the track on one of the practice days. I believe it was Friday. It was actually Friday after qualifying. There was like a massive line to get out of the track from the infield. And one of the guys who was camping there said that he's never seen traffic as bad as it was this year. And he said the line looked like it was probably going to be about a 2 or 3 hour wait to get out of the track. So we turned around, we booked it out of there. And if you're listening right now, here's your little secret. Just exit the track you just go through turn 10A and 10B and then down the hill and then just get out of there. Because if you try to go through the infield, it's not going to work. There's your little life hack if you go to Petit Le Mans. But yeah, apart from my traffic gripes, it's great to see as many fans at the track as there are. And also, not just that, but we're starting to see, I think, a lot more fans of IMSA, not just people who show up to the track to go watch a race. I was watching MX5 Cup racing, and there were like people there who were cheering on specific drivers. It's really interesting to me how invested some of these sports car racing fans are nowadays, and it's really great to see.
Yeah, it is. It is. The growth across the board has been incredible. I think saw a tweet today from Ash Vandalay, I think. Yep. I think I'm pronouncing her last name right. And she had 50,000 viewers that turned in over the course of her Petit Le Mans watch along. And so you see growth not just at the track or in the TV numbers, but also in some of these other areas, in other content around the series. There's been a huge spike in interest of a lot of racing disciplines in the past couple of years, and IMSA's been no different. And we're seeing it at the events, especially in this past season.
Yeah. And I want to add one last thing while we're talking about IMSA, and that is at the end of Petit Le Mans, I guess there was a sign-off by IMSA Radio that made it sound like they may not be coming back next year. And I know that there's been a bit of talk on social media about that. I can't comment that much about it. What I will say is there were some boots on the ground at Petit Le Mans, and from what I've heard, it sounds like they may be trying to do a switch up with the IMSA Radio / IMSA TV personnel for next year. The reasoning for that being, I guess, IMSA Radio right now is a production of Radio Show Limited, which is Radio Le Mans. The impression that I had gotten is that IMSA would like to try to own 100% of the broadcast. That way, if they try to move to producing like a world feed or something that gets distributed to a network, if the next TV contract with NBC expires and they try to go down a streaming route, that might be something that's important to them. What I will say is I would expect that we're going to hear some things in the off season about it. I don't think anything's formal yet, but there have certainly been some discussions on IMSA shaking up how they handle their actual media, from the social media side of things and also the streaming side of things. And I don't think you have to look that far to find that. We've talked about how Marshall Pruitt started doing content at Indianapolis that was being produced by Coforce. He did it at Petit Le Mans as well. So I think that that's a step in the right direction, but I do think that we should probably expect to see some changes whether it's a full-scale revamp of the commentary crew on IMSA Radio / IMSA TV, or just an increase on their social media presence. There's definitely some things going on behind the scenes that we'll probably end up talking about in the off season. So I'll leave it at that.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
On to more somber notes, I guess. This morning, we had a formal announcement from Jim Glickenhaus that they would be ending their WEC Hypercar program with the 007 Hypercar. Of course, that was the first manufacturer to formally announce a commitment to the Hypercar formula back in 2019. They've been racing ever since the 2021 6 Hours of Portimao. They were absent from the initial WEC Hypercar race at Spa in 2021, but got their debut in Portimao. They got a podium at Le Mans in 2022, and really just the thing about it, I think, is that team, whether you like Jim Glickenhaus or you hate him, he certainly had some hot takes over the years on social media and pissed off a couple groups of people. But privateers really matter in sports car racing. And I think that that's increasingly apparent when all the manufacturers decide to drop out. This is what we saw back in 2018 through 2021, I guess you could say. 2020, when all of the manufacturers, barring Toyota, dropped out of the series. It was really the privateers that kept the prototype class, or the LMP1 class, in the World Endurance Championship alive. So I think that, you can't, it's not a controversial opinion to say that privateers definitely matter in the WEC. And I do want to talk about how I think the Glickenhaus announcement impacts other privateers and what we can expect from other privateers racing in the hypercar category, whether that's in the hypercar class in the WEC or in the GTP class in IMSA. But before I do that, I just want to read a couple of statements from Jim Glickenhaus. This is from Daily Sports Car. And by the way, like I do every episode, I'm going to put all the stories that I'm referencing in the description and in the show notes on podcasting platforms so you can read them for yourself. Verbatim, though, here's what Jim Glickenhaus said. In the beginning, after the wrong turn taken to accommodate the original Aston Martin Valkyrie LMH, it was pretty simple. Bit of a dig there on Aston Martin and on the WEC itself. You built a car within regulations that could do a 3-minute 30 lap at Le Mans, and you were all set for the duration. Since then, though, there's been an all too predictable shift to the manufacturers driving forward development while we are on the very edge. I should stop reading too fast here. To carry on in anything like a competitive state, we'd have to invest in a magnesium block for the engine, or we'd have to run the current engine so lean that heat management would become an issue, meaning investment in new bodywork. Put that all together, and there are sums involved that we simply can't justify spending as we work on building the road car side of the business. So I think he brings up a couple interesting points there. Number one, bit of a dig at Aston Martin and at the WEC for changing the engine regulations. It's no secret that I think Glickenhaus was considering, planning on using an Alfa Romeo twin-turbo V6 when they started that program, and because of a change in the rule regulations where the cars had a lot more power than they initially were intended to have, Glickenhaus had to switch to that Pipa Motors V8 instead, which just hasn't seemed like it's been performing as well as they needed it to over the course of its duration. But the other thing that he pointed out, and this is the big thing to me, is that other manufacturers are out testing their cars. They're making changes to their cars. We're seeing manufacturers like Porsche and Toyota and Peugeot and Ferrari all starting to make changes to their cars. Toyota had an Evo kit for their car come out this year. Porsche's doing some reliability upgrades for next year. Peugeot's doing a rear wing, an entire, new concept with their 9X8 after already 2 seasons. And I think that that's too much for a privateer to really compete against, especially without a big sponsor backing. And that's the one thing that Glickenhaus really failed to secure over all their time, is they were never really able to sell that car to other customer teams, and they weren't able to get a big enough sponsor to pour more money into that program. At the end of the day, it's a business, and a small manufacturer like Glickenhaus is not going to have anywhere near as much money as Porsche or Lamborghini or Ferrari or any of those OEM manufacturers. So I think where this becomes interesting is in the hypercar category, and this is, I guess this is more relevant to the hypercar class than the GTP class, because with the LMDH regulations, you're mostly dealing with large-scale manufacturers because of how IMSA's rules are set up around the cars. The manufacturers have to produce a certain number of road cars to even be eligible to make a car, and that's why we weren't able to see Glickenhaus race in IMSA, and that's why we had the whole IMSA Glickenhaus war of 2022 or whatever it was. We're seeing a couple different hypercar manufacturers that are some of these more boutique companies. We had Glickenhaus, we have Van Wall, we have Assetto Fraschini coming in next year. We've had more rumored as potential possibilities. So I think what it comes down to is these manufacturers in the current state of the class are not really ever going to be able to compete. And I would love to be proven wrong on that. But I don't think the budget is there for them to be able to put as much testing time in, put as much R&D in, invest in a driver lineup as strong as Toyota or Ferrari or Porsche or whoever it may be. And I think they're always going to be on the back foot. What Glickenhaus said in the statement there was, we were told to design a car that could do a 3-minute 30 lap at Le Mans. They did that. The car was doing, I want to say like 3-minute 27 or 28 in qualifying this year. Maybe 26, can't remember. So it already hits that target, but we're starting to already, even though we're, I guess, in the first year of the golden era of modern prototype racing, to see a bit of a development war where even under the, I guess, heavy BOP sanctions that some of the manufacturers face this year, we saw a 3-minute 22 pole lap at Le Mans, which is already miles ahead of what we were planning on seeing, and we can only expect that that's going to get faster over time. So if you're a privateer, how are you really supposed to compete against that? Now, Stu, I'll stop talking in a second because I want to get your thoughts on this as well. But I talked in our BOP episode, the first episode that we had back, about how you have to find a real balance between having the pace of the cars be similar, but also you want to account for the fact that larger manufacturers are devoting a lot more resources into it. They're testing the cars a lot more. Their drivers are more skilled. They've put a lot more research and development into the programs. So naturally, they probably should be a little bit faster. I guess some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I of course, don't like to see Glickenhaus go. I haven't always been the biggest fan of Jim's, but
are you a sim racing player?
Yeah, but what he has done and contributed to not only the WEC but sports car racing in general, and being one of the only manufacturers that was on the grid in the early years of the hypercar class is, you got to tip your hat. And we might not be at this point as strong as we are today if Jim hadn't come forward and put those cars together and stuck it out for these few years. It's unfortunate to see them go and feel like they can't compete with these big manufacturers, but this is probably the way that you could always kind of see it going. Even in those early years, it was just let's wait until we can get the LMDH regulations, implemented, and COVID set those back a year, but let's just wait until we can get that. Then we're going to get some more manufacturers in it. And as soon as you get big manufacturers coming into it, even though they are confined within a tight window in what they can do performance-wise on the cars, they are going to find ways to exploit performance in other areas. Sure, the BOP does a great job of it can do a great job of keeping the car's ideal lap times and ideal performance within a nice area. But if you're comparing the Toyota, which can probably extract that maximum pace a lot more often than the Glickenhaus can in this instance, because of not necessarily better reliability or better, whatever it might be. Toyota is able to execute on that performance more frequently than say Glickenhaus or some of these other smaller manufacturers are able to, that don't have as large of a budget. So it's hard to cap that. It's hard to come in and say, hey, yeah, this is it's hard to account for that in BOP. You don't want to, you can't put a cap on what your 80% effort lap is, which is, probably around what you're going to be doing in an endurance race of 24 hours. You can't go 110% all the time, and every lap isn't going to be a qualifying lap. But the performance of tire management, if Toyota's, been engineered and improved to be a lot easier on tires over the course of a run, and they can therefore extract a higher level of performance over the course of that stint, those are hard to account for in BOP, and BOP is only going to do so much. And I think that's what you see lots of manufacturers doing with these Evo kits, with these improvements. Porsche is definitely doing it. They're trying to improve reliability. And Ferrari's doing the same thing. They're trying to improve reliability and bring raise that bar over the course of the entire race, as opposed to that maximum performance that they can extract out of the car. I think that's, again, you can't really account for that in BOP, but that's where I think ultimately the Glickenhauses and the smaller boutique manufacturers will fall a little bit short in the long run. And funding, Glickenhaus, they were trying to sell customer cars right up until this season. They're always talking about trying to find a customer for the car, but it's gotten to the point now where unless if I don't really know what the price comparison is for a Glickenhaus versus a customer Porsche 963, but if you're trying to compare those two, where with Porsche, there's a really established network that they have for spare parts, for customer support. Porsche is regarded as one of the best in the industry when it comes to their customer support. And if you're not a manufacturer, you're sort of a privateer looking to buy one of these cars, you're probably going to lean that way towards where you're going to be able to get the best support. And that you're always going to be able to access spare parts easily. And it's unfortunate, but I think there's a lot of factors that ultimately came into this decision for Glickenhaus.
Right. And the interesting thing is, so last season, 2022, we saw a lot more competitive results out of the Glickenhaus. Pole at Spa, pole at Monza. And they didn't even run the full season, so who knows what other potential they really had out of that car. Also, for what it's worth, should have won Monza had they not had the engine issue during the race. This season in particular, I think with the additional manufacturers coming in, the WEC kind of took the training wheels off and said, all right, look, we brought you well within that window. We're going to have to see some more development out of the car for you to really stick it to the big manufacturers like Ferrari and Toyota. And for what it's worth, they actually had a very strong finish at Le Mans this year, finishing ahead of the factory Porsches, ahead of the factory Peugeots. And I think that's something that Jim Glickenhaus is very vocal about, very proud about, and he should be. The only thing I will say is it's a bit of a slippery slope, because on one side I can see where Jim's coming from. They did everything they were told to do. They built a car that got within that window. And even on one lap pace, they're not even close to where manufacturers like Ferrari and Toyota and Cadillac and Porsche and the likes are right now. The only thing I need to stress so many times over is that you have to accommodate the privateers. Because I know how strong sports car racing is right now, and I know that we're going to have a capacity grid at Le Mans next year, and there's probably going to be 15 plus cars on the reserve list, and they're in a very comfortable place right now. But there will be a day, and it may be 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, it may be even earlier, when we are not in a time like this. And a lot of the manufacturers are going to start to cancel programs. It's bound to happen. This is the sports car racing roller coaster that's happened dozens of times since its inception. And it's always the privateers that are there to save your ass, kind of. And I don't want to be in a position where either IMSA or the WEC get too complacent with privateer entries, that they sort of just phase them out. Because I think they have a very big spot in top-level prototype racing. And I think that they need to do what they can to at least accommodate and listen to the concerns of those manufacturers. At the end of the day, this was a funding issue, though. This wasn't Glickenhaus didn't pull out because he was mad about the BOP. He wasn't mad that he wasn't on the podium at Le Mans this year. It was really an issue of funding. But I think that does bring up that concern where this is now the first manufacturer that we've lost from the Hypercar GTP regulations. And it won't be the last manufacturer, but I just hope that they keep it in mind. I hope they keep the privateers in the back of their head, because sometime eventually down the road, you're going to want those privateers. You're going to need those privateers to keep the class moving into its next iteration of regulations, whatever that may be.
I wanna just throw in an asterisk here.
Go ahead.
I think Audi's the first manufacturer that we lost.
Let me clarify that.
I know what you're saying.
That was actually on track. All right, the first manufacturer that actually hit the racetrack. Because I guess you could throw Aston Martin in that mix too, but then they came back. So
that's true.
That's pretty much all I can say about it. It's an unfortunate loss. I'm a big fan of, again, no matter what you think of Jim Glickenhaus as a person, I'm a big fan of the mentality of build your own car, and I respect the hell out of him for doing it. It would be one thing, and there have been people who say, oh, Jim should just buy a Porsche and race the Glickenhaus racing outfit in a Porsche 963, and he'll be able to fight for podiums, and that's not what he's about. And I'm glad that that's not what he's about. I'm glad that he had the courage to build a Le Mans hypercar and bring it to the grid and show the world what it was capable of, and get on the podium at Le Mans in 2022 and grab a couple pole positions. That's sort of the sports car racing dream, and I feel like sports car racing is the only form of motorsport where you're actually going to see that nowadays. We're certainly not going to see privateers in F1 really fighting for poles and wins at this stage of the game. And IndyCar, NASCAR are completely, lost cause. So I think sports car racing is sort of rare in a scenario like that, where they're able to have storylines like that. So unfortunate. They will still be continuing though in the racing scene. I know that they have their hydrogen Baja truck that they've been hyping up for years. They're also still producing road cars. Glickenhaus is the manufacturer that I first became familiar with at the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, actually. I believe it was back in 2016. They got the overall pole. I might be wrong about that. But the SPX class with the SCG 003. And it was great to see them in the World Endurance Championship while it lasted. And going to be a sad loss, I think. So that's all I have to cover for that one. We have a little bit more time. Let me actually get to some questions, though, because I saw a couple of people talking about Glickenhaus earlier. Tara's just saying, rest in peace, the Glickenhaus Hypercar. She was a classic-looking car and dressed in the American racing colors. Yeah, that's true. And I guess, they started out with that red livery, and then they went to the, Dynaco blue.
Dynaco.
I don't know how
that wasn't what came to my mind.
It wasn't?
No,
but it was, though. It was the Dynaco blue. That was the...
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. It is Dynaco blue. I always think of it as like powder blue, but
yeah,
I like the way that you're thinking. I like the way that you're thinking better than
Listen,
than
man,
me.
2006 Cars is like one of
Oh,
the main influences for me. When you're a 5-year-old
I
kid and
agree.
you watch Cars, that's one of my main influencers for getting into racing in the first place. I got to give him credit.
My friends always
Um,
give me a hard time because I walk around and quote lines from that movie, and yeah, they get they get annoyed.
I saw people on the internet being happy or simply not caring about Glickenhaus leaving the WEC. Why do you think that is the case? People happy because Jim Glickenhaus is a bit of a polarizing figure for like reasons, by the way, that I don't fully understand. And I know you said, Stu, that you weren't the biggest fan of him as a person, and he's not afraid to have hot takes on Twitter.
Yeah,
The social, not the social, the sim racing thing turned a lot of people off, which was interesting to me because like I can't pull it off the thing right now, but like there's a sim racing wheel right here. Like I do sim racing, but yeah, that was an interesting one to me. There's just people who weren't the biggest fan of him as a person. It doesn't surprise me that they're not entirely sad to see the program going away. In terms of not caring either, the car wasn't a front runner this year. It's never raced in the entire WEC schedule. Usually it's just run the American Sebring round and then the European rounds as well. Hasn't been present in the full season. So I think for some people, they might not even notice that it's missing half the time because it's only been present in half the races.
it's true.
So as brutal as it is to say, I feel like that's the case for some people.
Yeah, I think you're right. You get that combination of a polarizing figure. I mean, you're either on Jim's team or you're not on Jim's team. Like that's kind of the way that that it is. But I think one of the things that that you mentioned there that it did annoy me a little bit with them was committing to the full season and then not following through on that for the past couple of years. I don't know if they really explicitly committed to it this year, but last year I know it was it's disappointing, and it teams do the same thing in IMSA. They were doing it this year at the beginning of this season when the Rolex 24 grid was full and there was a wait list, and there were teams that were committing to do the Michelin Endurance Cup and then backed out. And that was annoying to see, but small gripes. But
yeah, which I'll give them credit that they ran. I think they ran the races that they could, and I'll take the races that they ran over not being there at all.
Yeah,
I can understand though where you're coming
Fuji's
from.
a pretty expensive race to get to. So.
Oh, of course, and in fact, the figure that Jim talked about in that Daily SportsCar article was a 7-figure budget that they would really need to upgrade that car and bring it into contention with the other manufacturers that we've seen racing right now. And even if they pour that money in, who's to say that it's even going to be fighting for pole positions and wins and championships then? Yeah. It's one thing to have a competitive car. You then need to run it for the entire World Endurance Championship, which is not, as you just said, it's not a cheap championship to run in. So, I think we're going to have to see what other privateers do. I applaud the other privateers. People can laugh about Van Wall and Asada Fraschini hasn't hit the track yet, but we'll have to see how they perform. They can laugh at it all they want, but at the end of the day, I think they're still bringing value to the hypercar category. Let's see what else. We had a comment from Glickenhaus deserves a sympathy BOP. Well, unfortunately, I think it's too late for that because they're not going to be racing in any other races this season. And then I'm just trying to see if there were any other things about Glickenhaus that we could...
Long live the Glick.
Yeah. Long live the Glick, yep. All right, I don't see... Oh, okay. Not only do we have to say goodbye to Glickenhaus, but 2 weeks from now we'll have to say goodbye to the GT2, GTE regs forever. I have a video coming out about that, so stay tuned. But yes, that'll be a very disappointing loss as well. So I want to move things on to the last subject here. Stu, you wanted to talk about a bit of an interesting story from the Michelin Pilot Challenge. That works out perfect because I had a very loud fan turn on in the background that I forgot to shut off before I started the podcast. So I'm going to shut that off and I'll let you kick off the story here.
Alrighty. So we don't usually talk about the the Michelin Pilot Challenge or lots of the other support series generally. Usually we stick to GTP and Hypercar and WEC and IMSA. Well, there's been an interesting development in the Michelin Pilot Challenge since the season finale, and that is that the result of the championship in the GS class, the Grand Sport class, is being appealed by Rebel Rock Racing. So Rebel Rock Racing, they field the number 71 Camaro it's a GT4 spec car. And when the race first ended, it seemed like they were the champions. When they crossed the start-finish line, IMSA TV, IMSA Radio, they were calling it that, Rebel Rock Racing have done what they needed to do. They are the champions in GS. Well, that was before some post-race penalties were accounted for. There were a couple of drive-throughs that went unserved by the number 14 and number 50 entries. And based on where Turner Motorsports finished, they were a little bit further down the grid. They were ultimately 20 when they first crossed the line. They were 20 points off of Rebel Rock Racing, but now at this point they were tied. They were brought even when you account for these post-race penalties. So they're even. Rebel Rock Racing actually still had the tiebreaker. I think it was based on wins. Whoever has the most wins. If it's not wins, whoever has the most second place finishes, etc. However, before they crossed the start-finish line, the number 27 Lone Star Racing Mercedes, they brought the car into the pits on the last lap of the race, which gave Turner Motorsports the additional position that they needed to beat Rebel Rock Racing by 10 points, basically one position on track, and they got the championship. So, after initially Rebel Rock Racing crossing the line, the broadcast, saying, "Oh yes, so Rebel Rock they pulled it out. They finished enough. They finished X number of positions ahead. They have this point gap." That turned out to be incorrect, and there's been some more interesting developments as to why the number 27 actually came into the pits. It's understood and it's reported in everything that any articles, whether it be on Daily Sports Car, anywhere around the internet, there's been no reported issues from that Lone Star Racing Mercedes. It appeared that they just brought the car into the pits and were forfeiting their position on track, which is where Rebel Rock Racing is appealing this decision. There is a clause, or there is a rule in the IMSA rule book for actions detrimental to sports car racing. We've heard this be thrown around in NASCAR for sure, but it certainly we want to know what happened that the 27 brought the car into the race. I think saw rumblings that there may have been an incident between the 71 and the number 27 earlier in the season. It may have been at VIR that they came together, and there may have been some hurt feelings from that. To add more fuel to this fire, in the post-race broadcast, there was a member of the number 27 crew that was seen on the broadcast in the Rebel Rock Racing pit area that was making a not so nice gesture. So this has kind of fueled a bunch of theories. You can kind of piece together whatever you think your theory might be here. But regardless, Rebel Rock Racing has appealed the result of, I think they appealed the result of the race as opposed to actually appealing the championship, because that's what they had to do. But the result of the race has been appealed. There has been no report back from IMSA. Rebel Rock Racing and Lone Star Racing have not commented on it. And I really just hope that this is not a big dramatic, that there's not something deeper happening here. I hope there was some sort of failure on the car, and I'm really hoping for that. But we'll have to see what the reports are from that appeal. But yeah, things are looking interesting there right now. So don't have really much else to comment on it other than that, but we'll wait and see.
Okay, so here's where I'm confused.
Okay.
I didn't know about this story until you just told me.
Yep.
But, and that's part of being at the track and not being able to follow the race as well as I'd like. But, so the 71 is the Rebel Rock Racing Camaro. Champion, allegedly, when they crossed the line.
They thought. The broadcast team thought, yeah.
Right. The 27 Lone Star Racing Mercedes came into the pits on the last lap.
They were running between Rebel Rock and the Turner Motorsports BMW position-wise at the end of the race. So heading on to the final lap.
So at that point, it didn't... By them coming to the pits, it still didn't matter, though, because the post-race penalties weren't applied at that point, right? Well, so this is where I'm confused. So were they expecting those post-race penalties, and that's why they might have pulled into the pits? Because otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me why Lone Star Racing would pull into the pits just to...
It doesn't. It does not make sense. They were not a team that was going to be penalized. There were two cars... There were two cars between Rebel Rock and the Turner Motorsports BMW that were set to be penalized. They received a penalty. I remember looking at the live timing, and you saw it from race control pop up, and they just didn't have time. They weren't going to have time to serve the penalties. So it was known that there were post-race penalties coming as a result of not serving those drive-throughs. And on the last lap, the number 27 pulled into the pits with no penalty that was going to be applied to them. They didn't have to serve a penalty, and they just stopped in their pit box with seemingly no issues. There was no reported issues that I've seen as a result that led them to pulling into their pits, into their box.
Interesting. The interesting part about it to me is I don't really know what IMSA could do to Lone Star Racing other than just penalize Lone Star Racing. I don't see how you could overturn the results of a championship because of that.
I agree.
It's a very, very large gray area. So
I suppose, well, yeah, I mean, we saw this with F1 has gone through, there was allegations and accusations that turned out to be true. And when was that Singapore race?
Oh, wait.
the crash gate? Yeah.
That we're still talking about 15 years later, by the way.
Exactly. So hopefully this is not the result of that, or hopefully that didn't happen. Like I said, hopefully there was a problem that they had to pull in. Maybe they ran out of fuel or something. But there would, I don't know what mechanisms IMSA has in place. But I would imagine that if there were to be anything that would be handed out, it would not be it would probably not be too good for Lone Star Racing, if that is the case.
Well, we'll wait and see on that one. I guess we'll report on anything in a future episode if we hear anything, depending on when/if anything gets announced. Yeah. That's an interesting story. It's, I think, uncharted waters for IMSA, though, and I haven't brushed up on the IMSA rulebook in ever. So I don't know what IMSA's course of action would be for something like that. But yeah, that's an interesting one for sure. And then unfortunately, we don't have a documentary series for the Pilot Challenge that can make a dramatic episode about that either. So
maybe there will be a Win the Weekend episode on it if
maybe there will be an Off in the Esses video about it if
that's true.
Make a documentary or something.
Investigative reporter Stu.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna do a quick cycle through for any comments that were not related to the stories we were talking about, and that should wrap up the episode. And we have, I don't know how we do this, but every time we do an episode without planning it, they always end up being within an hour, 5 minutes of an hour and a half every single time. So
it's the internal clock.
It is. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, and I'll try to get to those as I go through the list. Let's see, which ones did I not answer?
I got one here from Ian Hall, and do we think that MSR will return to the top class someday. Some are saying they will come with Alpine, but is this realistic? Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure. Will they return to the top class someday? Likely. Will they return with Alpine? Potentially. I've heard people say things. I've heard people also say things that haven't turned out to be true. So I'm not going to report on anything definitively right now. We do know that Alpine and Meyer-Shank Racing actually have a bit of a tie-in. Not because the cars are both pink, like you said in one of those episodes, Stu, but because they're both actually sponsored by AutoNation. Now, there was a rumor back in, I want to say May of this year. It was around the F1 time that AutoNation would become the dealer, like the main supplier of Alpine when they inevitably make their U.S. market debut or North American market debut. I think they're planning on introducing EVs to the North American market. And there was a rumor that AutoNation would be the sole dealer that distributed those vehicles. AutoNation obviously being a primary sponsor over at Meyer-Shank Racing, there's a pretty decent tie-in there. I have heard people behind the scenes say that Meyer-Shank Racing would be a shoo-in for that Alpine team, I guess. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
It'd make a lot of sense.
Yes, and you've said from day one that it would make a lot of sense. I was a bit tunnel visioned when I said I saw them racing with Acura in 2024. There was enough writing on the wall in hindsight. Of course, hindsight 2020. But I would keep your eyes out for that. I think that's something that we might see around the 2025 timeframe, though. And in terms of, actually, Andrew Reeves said,
Yep.
Did anybody see the Alpine testing and some of the livery? I saw 3 A110 road cars out here in Michigan today with manufacturer plates. So maybe they'll race here in 25. The most interesting part of that comment to me is that you saw A110s over in Michigan.
Yeah.
Because even should Alpine come over to the U.S. As a road car manufacturer, what I had heard is that they would be producing EVs. I would love to see if they brought the A110 here. I think that's a fantastic sports car, but that's not the point of this podcast. But that's definitely interesting if they had manufacturer plates on them and they weren't just imported over to the U.S. And I think that would speak a little bit to the likeliness that we see Alpine racing in IMSA. But that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that, wasn't expecting that, and I'll see if that actually ends up making any difference. Around the Canton, Michigan area, for what it's worth.
Another tie for MSR and Alpine as well. The chassis.
Oh,
the Acura and the Alpine share that chassis.
Yep. And I wonder how much that actually matters, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I had seen people who said, oh, they could just convert that to an LMP2 car and race in the LMP2 class next year. But realistically, and also they couldn't do that for what it's worth, because it's the next gen LMP2 chassis.
Yeah.
And they can't race in the current LMP2 regulations with that chassis. But I saw people saying that in the DPI days as well. It's just you convert it from an LMP2 car and vice versa. But how easy is that actually? Because the chassis underneath is the same, yes, but you have to think the bodywork's different, the engine would be different. Yeah. I mean, how much of the car is actually different to the point where you can't really make that conversion?
Yeah. So, but there would be a lot of, you would think, useful data transfer that they would have. You know, it's going to be the same spec hybrid system that they're working with. You're working with the same chassis. Sure, you're going to have different engine, different suspension components, everything like that. But it's definitely a step up, especially if Meyer-Shank, they're not going to be racing in IMSA next year. That would be, you can really devote some time to helping develop that car.
And if Meyer-Shank Racing, if Alpine does end up wanting to race in IMSA, there's like no better team on the open market right now.
Who's been better than
field
them?
That car?
Yeah, who's been better than Meyer-Shank Racing the past 6, 7, 8 years in IMSA? I don't know if you could pinpoint somebody.
And the last point I'll make about it, and this is what's funny about it to me. Andretti Autosport has been trying to get over to Le Mans for a while now. They were initially rumored to potentially be partnering with Audi for their LMDH program that fell through the cracks. I don't know how much progress was actually made on that. Unfortunately, Andretti / Wayne Taylor right now are sort of held back by Honda. We'll see if the recent Honda Racing Corporation of America announcement actually has any impact on Acura's / Honda's plans to go to Le Mans. But right now, that's their hurdle. They can't enter that race if they want to with the current car that they have. It would be quite the backstab if Meyer-Shank Racing were able to partner with Alpine and then go to Le Mans in 2025, because that car obviously is already racing in the World Endurance Championship next year, so they'll already be homologated. They won't have to do any additional work, and if they got an invite, they'd be more than welcome to race at Le Mans. So,
yep.
something to keep your eye on. Andrew from the Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan BMW team is back in the chat. The LMDH chassis is our previous gen chassis modified to fit the HV batteries, hybrid batteries. Still can't convert to LMP2 anyways. Yeah. So pretty much exactly what I had said. Not an easy process by any means. So if it's possible at all, which it sounds like it's pretty much not.
And I think Andrew, this is last week with Team RLL.
Oh,
so excited to see where Andrew's going to be going next. I think I saw that on Twitter.
I happened to miss that one. Yost Racing has been running the Glickenhaus program, so will that let them go do something otherwise? In theory, yes. What they would do, I'm not sure.
They've probably had some other programs going on in the background in addition to Glickenhaus as well, you would think. Maybe some historic racing.
I don't know if they have. Obviously, they were partnered with Mazda for those few seasons in the U.S., and then it became a full Multimatic program. I don't believe Yost has been involved in anything, though, since leaving Audi, besides the Mazda program, which started in 2018, and the Glickenhaus program, which started, obviously, in 2021. For Glickenhaus, they were more of like a technical partner. I believe they were assisting with personnel for that program, but I don't remember what specific capacity they were serving for that team. Now, the only role I could see Yost playing potentially is if we saw another hypercar manufacturer come in, we might see them partner. As far as I could remember, Yost Racing left Mazda so that they could focus on another project in Germany. I don't know what that program was, but and I don't know if anything ever came out of that. So we'll have to wait and see. That was years ago, though, so I don't know if that would even be something that was still active right now. It could be something really small as well. It might not be a proper sports car racing program. So I will leave it at that, though. I think that's enough for a good episode. And we will be back in 2 weeks' time, I believe. But check our X account if you want any updates on that, at Rain Race Podcast. And I'll also update in my Discord and the community tab on YouTube if there are any changes to that. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. We have a WEC preview for the season finale of Bahrain. We have another episode scheduled, hopefully for the week after that, so we can recap Bahrain. And then that's it. Then we're into the off season until the end of January. But with the current sports car racing landscape, I'm sure we'll have plenty of news to cover over that off season. So, Stu, I'm going to toss it over to you. Any final thoughts from tonight's episode?
No, a great end to the IMSA season at Petit Le Mans. It was a little bit of a chaotic one, but definitely lots to talk about, and And man, a great end to the return of GTP, and really makes you look forward to what we're going to have on our plate next year. But as you just mentioned, still some racing to be done with. I think the ELMS season finale is this weekend,
Yep.
and then WEC at Bahrain.
Yep. Yeah, and just quickly comment on what you said. For the first season of the GTP class in IMSA, you really couldn't ask for that much more. It had dramatic moments. It had repeat winners. It had technically every single manufacturer win. BMW is still looking for that first on-track victory, but great energy going into next season with the addition of Lamborghini at the endurance rounds, and then even more progress moving into the further seasons beyond. So I think it was great, and I appreciate everybody for tuning into this episode. Like I said, we'll be back probably in around 2 weeks to do another one, and hope to see you all there. Take care.